Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Russ Jones.
And Brad Kennan here.
We are wide open. How are you?
I'm fine. Once again, we're doing this. It seems like every time we get done, and it seems like it pops around right away. I don't know if I'm getting older and just time's going faster or what. So,
yeah, I feel like a champion tonight.
That's good. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I feel. There you go. There you go. You're feeling kind of like a champion.
I'm feeling kind of like a champion. So
yeah, that's good, man.
So yeah. I mean,
weather's warm, weather's beautiful.
Yep. And I had to break out a hat. So
I was telling you before we got on here, I have not seen you a hat in 15 years. You're insistent that you do wear one at work, but I have never seen you in a hat.
So I was on a job and I forgot my hat in a hotel one time.
Mm-hmm.
So I go into I'm like, man, it's hot out here. I got to go find a hat.
Okay.
So I go into the gas stations and they had this hat right here. And I said, I have to buy that hat. So I bought this hat at a gas station in South Carolina.
How many years ago is this?
Last year.
Okay. I mean, I probably go through 20 or 30 hats a year just because I'm always wearing them working out and I'm sweating through them. And I'm in the woods and they get all skunky.
Yeah, I don't, I got maybe a rotation of about 4 hats, maybe. Or
you wear one once every 15 years.
I wear one hat and I just wear it out, then I throw it away and I get another one.
Yeah, you're wearing the hats now. They're in style because you're wearing the hats from the 70s because that was the last time you wore a hat. Now they're back in style.
Right. Yeah. So anyway.
Okay.
So it's beat up on Brad. I'm trying to smile more.
I know.
I don't smile enough. This is how it is. Beat up on Brad because he's the mean guy.
Hey, I got a couple messages I want to tell you this week.
Right.
On social media that, people like it more when you're trying to smile and blah, blah, blah. And they didn't realize that you were not, grouchy.
A dick.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what.
You kind of are a dick, but you're just a nice dick.
Right. I am. So when I'm out on the job and I'm out with my guys and things don't go well, I literally just, because what I do is fairly, not a lot of people do it. And there's a lot of this work out here right now. So I can kind of pick and choose my jobs.
Yeah.
And I literally just tell my customer I'm leaving. And they're like, calling me back saying, well, are you going to come back? Are you going to stay for tomorrow? I'm like, so then I tell them, I said, you know what? I'm sure you talk to your field guy. I'm a dick. I understand that, but we'll all work it out and be friends. So Just pay me more money and give me better terms and we'll keep on moving down the road. So
there you go.
Anyway, so with all this UAP stuff coming out, and you spend so much time in the woods, and we spend a lot of time in the woods at night during the daytime. Have you ever seen a UAP? Have you ever seen a UFO? Have you ever seen something happen that says, you know what, that could be extraterrestrial?
I can never remember UAP. I mean, what was wrong with UFO? I mean, why did the government have to change? I mean, why did they have to change things that were fine?
Because they did a study. They got some funding at a college, and that funding was to find a nomenclature to replace UFO, and they were funded.
Are you being serious, or are you just making this
up? $60,000, and they came up with UAP.
Now, give me a break. I mean, why do things have to change? If something's okay, if it's if it works, if everybody knows what it is, people have been saying it generationally. Now, people have to come up with these new terms and stuff. I mean, new things are not always better.
Because it could not be a flying object. It could be anomalous phenomenon or unidentified anomalous phenomenon. I don't even know what it is. It could be swamp gas, you know what I mean? So, or a weather balloon. It's not UFOs.
To answer your question, my grandparents, of course, lived in Vinton County, Ohio, Ohio's most rural county. And my grandparents had told me that my grandma's father was plowing with a horse the garden, a large garden, several acres for potatoes. And they were standing in the edge of the field watching him, and he was plowing back toward them. And the field was maybe 150 yards long. And that they saw a UFO come down just in an instant, hovered right over the end of the field, and then was gone just that quickly.
Well, there
So,
you
you know, I don't know. I mean, they didn't really want to talk about it, but I mean, clearly my kinfolk from, rural Appalachia had no reason to.
lie to you.
Yeah, well, they didn't really want to talk about it. So
Why would they lie?
I mean, geez.
Right.
I mean,
So that's gonna move into our first guest, or
okay.
actually first guest. We
First
only have
guest.
one. We only have one
Wow.
guest tonight. So you thought we were changing up, have multiple
Yeah.
guests.
How long are we on tonight?
I don't know. This guest might have multiple personalities. I don't know, but I don't think so.
No, that's usually my relationships. That's not had anything to do with our guests. So, let's come on, man.
We're not going there.
Okay.
Anyway, we're bringing on Micah Hanks again for the second time. He's
Micah.
Our first repeat guest. I was with Micah at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference a couple weeks ago, and I shoved beers in his hand. I mean, not beers, pop in his hand. And as the later the night got, I finally, kind of said, "Hey, Micah, why don't you come on and talk about UFOs?" And he just, he was so happy. He just said, "Sure." And I'm like, I recorded it on my phone and I played it to him the next day. And I said, "Micah, you said you'd come on and talk about this." And he's like, "Damn, Brad, you got me." So here he is. So he's fulfilling his agreement.
That's exactly how it happened, folks.
His campfire agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last time I saw the two of you, and by the way, what an incredible time up there together in Ohio.
Yes.
Good seeing both y'all.
Yes.
And getting out and hiking with you, Russ, finally getting out.
Great.
That was really just a highlight of the whole weekend. And then just having some downtime, Brad, when you joined us the final evening there. But we were, rather than looking at UAP like we're going to be discussing tonight, I guess we were looking for UABs up there, unidentified anomalous bipeds, maybe.
There you go. That's a new term. Didn't even cost the government $60,000. You just came up with that.
There you go. Yeah. So, it is funny because although I'm really better known for my work in that area with regard to UAP, as Russ knows, and you probably do too, Brad, it's been a long, interest of mine ever since childhood. The question of relic hominoids or Sasquatch. And I look at both of them. I don't necessarily think that there's a connection between them, but I mean, they're both scientific issues that to me are similar in the sense that they both could represent, non-human intelligences that are right here in our midst and are both equally worthy of scientific inquiry, because fundamentally the result of either discovery would effectively be the same in my view. We are not alone. If we prove Sasquatch is there, I mean, there is something more like humans that is living amongst us here on Earth that has remained hidden, and yet it's right here in our midst. That would be the largest, the most tremendous upset in the history of science. But the same thing would happen if we confirmed that UAP really were anything, but especially if they're extraterrestrial.
I mean, the things we're going to talk about tonight, and the reason we're having you on is because there are two instances in history that I've looked into, and I think they're just fascinating. And if this does not prove that we are not alone, that these aliens have come to Earth, they visited us, I don't know what else we need. I mean, honestly, hundreds of people see them. We have witnesses. We have, black SUVs, men in black showing up different places, and I saw something the other day I think it was on Instagram, where literally it was somebody had a UAP sighting outside their window at a retail establishment or something, and literally they had the security footage of the two men in black come in through the front door, and they said, "Here's two guys dressed in black," and they were men in black. They came in and talked to us about this and told us we didn't see anything, nothing happened here, and they told us to be quiet. So I'll start sending that stuff to you when I run across that, and you can say, "Oh, this is stupid," or "This is not," whatever. I pass it along. Do. So the two things that really, I think that it's just such an amazing stories that a lot of people don't even know about is the Varginha Brazil, and that was in 1994, 96, and the Ruwa, Zimbabwe. It was at Ariel School. Is that what it was? Where I think it was about 62 children and maybe a staff member, a science teacher, saw a spaceship land, basically, and some beings get out, walk around. They saw it. All this
what
stuff.
What year was that?
That was 1994. That one was.
Okay, 1994.
Mm-hmm.
And, these things supposedly use telepathic powers to connect with the kids and all this kind of stuff. What they said was, we'll get into that here in a second. Which one do you want to tackle first?
Why don't we could actually go, I guess, in chronological order if you want, and begin with the Ruwa, Zimbabwe case.
Sure.
That one's kind of near and dear to my heart for various reasons, because you guys may have, of course, seen the film Ariel Phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That film, in fact, right before, and I probably told you guys this up there in Ohio when we were all together, I literally had come from Washington, D.C. the night before I arrived and saw you guys down there by the lake in Ohio. Having just arrived from a showing of that film that Randall Nickerson did in Washington, D.C. And how that came about had been that I'd watched the film for the first time, and this is kind of the weird tie-in with all this, because very appropriate we're discussing these two cases back to back tonight. I was in Brazil last spring when I watched the Ariel School film and first really took the deep dive on that case. And then I come back from Brazil and I meet almost immediately after coming back from Brazil, I traveled to a couple of conferences, and one of them Randall Nickerson happened to be at. And so I met him, got to know him pretty well. And we, of course, built a relationship, and he eventually invited me to come up there to Washington right before I saw you guys the other day and attend a event and actually moderate a panel discussion where the lead scientific investigator who was part of that case, one of the associates of the late Dr. John Mack had been there, and others too. So in essence, what this case involved, I think it was September 16th, 1994, there'd been a long recess that day at the Ariel School there in Ruwa, Zimbabwe. And there had been a faculty meeting that particular afternoon. And so what ends up happening is the children are out there and they're playing, and they all come back in and they're very excited, and they're telling the faculty members who had all been inside, except for maybe one or two, it was later revealed. They're all saying that they'd observed something that really frightened them. The way that they described this, they had said that initially there was a loud whistling noise that drew their attention up toward this kind of a stony outcrop, not unlike some of the ones that Russ, you and I were hiking around on just the other day. And so there's this huge stone protrusion, and they say that this craft had kind of dropped down, similar to a flying saucer. There had been others that had been observed as well nearby over a field, and I'll come back around to that point in a moment, because this is actually a very important side note that isn't often discussed with regard to this case. But the children said that there was this craft that had touched down, and that there were these beings outside the craft. They were dressed in these sort of form-fitting black costumes. One of them appeared even to have sort of long hair, but in their general description, they had disproportionately large heads compared to the rest of their body, fairly large, dark eyes. The descriptions the children would give were pretty haunting. I mean, some said that they felt like these beings, the perspective the children had gotten had been that these beings wanted them. They wanted to come get them. Some said that they seemed to be, and they never said that they heard them saying this. Some implied that they may have received sort of an impression, but the general sense among some of the children had been that there was some sort of a message about technology or the environment.
The environment is what I remember. It's kind of like, hey, you're killing yourself. You got to do something about the environment, blah, blah, blah. But that's blah, blah, so blah. Back in 1990, for whatever it was, they're still saying that. And, I think somebody said the other day, who was it, Jane Fonda or something, all white men need to be arrested because we're causing massive climate change and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So there you go. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is a common trope of these kind of incidents. People who claim that they've met the occupants of UAP, they often say these kinds of things, which is interesting in itself, whether that's a psychological component or whether there's a genuine message being conveyed. Again, it's kind of beyond the scope of this conversation to try and make those determinations, but that is how the children, many of them, describe this. Now, the case is significant, I think, for a few reasons. And in fact, even having watched the documentary last spring when I was visiting Brazil, for some reason, you ever have these things, you guys probably as researchers have both experienced this, where something just is smacking you in the face and you just don't get it right offhand. It takes like 2-3 rereadings, or if it's a documentary or something, you have to rewatch it. And then after the 4th or 5th time, all of a sudden, it's just like a ton of bricks. Bam. Oh, finally, there it was. It took me 2 watchings of this film over the course of more than a year to realize. Again, sitting there in Brazil, watching it in 2 sittings, fascinating story. Going to Washington, D.C., and sitting in the nation's capital just days after a Senate hearing that included the primary witness being Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who is the director of the Department of Defense's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is currently characterizing and evaluating UAP reports for the past. I'm sitting there in Washington, D.C. Joining me is a close colleague and friend of mine, Kevin Wright, who's the director of public relations with the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, which is a nonprofit science organization I'm a part of that looks into these phenomena. And we're sitting there watching this film, and I had that ton of bricks moment. I really did. I'm watching this documentary for the second time through, and I'm just suddenly overpowered by the fact that there are more than 60 children at this school. You know, I mean, just a large number of them, multiple witnesses to a phenomena that occurred there. And I've long been intrigued by multiple witness observations, even single witnesses, if they're reputable witnesses, where an object, an unidentified flying object or UAP has landed and the occupants of those craft have been observed. I think those are really important cases because at some point, as we're studying these phenomena, we're going to have to get around to recognizing, you know, who the controllers are, who or what the occupants represent. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is probably in that context, one of the most important cases in all history. Now, obviously, Dr. John Mack, the late Harvard psychiatrist, and again, I mean, widely respected in his field, it was immediately clear to him the significance of this case, and he traveled to Zimbabwe. And in fact, actually joining us, as I mentioned, there in Washington for this showing had been Dominique Kalamanopoulos, who was an associate of John Mack, and she had traveled there with him a couple of times. But John goes down and he sits down as a clinical professional trained to talk with children, adults, family members, all these sorts of, you know, people in different situations and in different circumstances involving psychological issues they may be facing. He's well trained in that, and he's sitting down asking these children, tell me what you saw. How did it make you feel? What did it mean to you? And he came away unequivocally feeling these children are telling the truth. These kids all saw something. They experienced something, and it seems to be physical and tangible. I think that most of the faculty members there at the school also came away with that feeling because they'd had the children sit down and draw these images. You guys have probably seen some of the drawings.
Yeah.
There is remarkable similarity in the way that the craft was, you know, drawn, again, very much like a flying saucer.
Yeah, there is.
Dark coloration of the suits that the occupants had worn, things like this. One faculty member, I think, had said he thought they all made it up. And this remains sort of the predominant skeptical interpretation. Skeptic Brian Dunning, who I've communicated with, he said, you know, this is probably mass hysteria, and that's a common thing in parts of Africa.
Wasn't there a science teacher out there or something that observed it also?
There was one faculty member who reportedly may have actually observed it, if memory serves.
Okay.
Now, separate from the thing that happened there at the school, there were actually several sightings, which I'll come back around to in a moment. I didn't quite realize before I really started getting to know Randall Nickerson, and he and I, and also Gunther Hofer, one of the original investigators and a very scientific-minded individual who was there present and conducted these early investigations. As I began to speak with them, I began to really understand the full scope of this case and what it all entails. But immediately, talking about the children and what they experienced, again, skeptics often say it may have been mass hysteria. Mick West, in recent days, who's best known for being a UAP skeptic these days, but really is just generally speaking a skeptic. He had not necessarily suggested this was
Here's one thing I'm going to just make a comment about. Sure. Someone that is a skeptic. If you've made your living on being a skeptic, you're not a skeptic. You are playing a part. So no matter what you do, you can't go against what you've been saying. So you're always going to be that part no matter what. So you're playing a part at this point in time. You're not a skeptic.
Well, look,
you're just a guy who just takes an anti-point to, the sky's blue. No, it's yellow. You know what I mean? It's just, you're the opposite no matter what.
Well,
so
I'm skeptical. Brad, you're skeptical. Russ, you're skeptical.
Yes, I am.
We have talked about this, the three of us, a lot, but
I don't make my money on it. You know what I mean?
Right. There's a difference between being someone who is professionally, either by virtue of becoming best known for being, or again,
Correct.
if somebody professionally, i.e. they work in that capacity. If somebody is a professional debunker, it's fine, I think, to be skeptical. It's healthy. In our line of work, you've got to be able to be skeptical.
I believe so too.
But the problem I have with a so-called debunker is that, and by the way, you know, not in every case, in the examples I've given, Brian Dunning, Mick West, I've corresponded with both these guys. They're good guys. Their intentions are good. And especially Brian will tell you at times when he doesn't know the answer to a case. Sometimes he has to say, I just don't know, and that's as far as we can take it. And I respect that. But there are some instances throughout history where there are people who are debunkers by trade, by definition, and inevitably they come to a skeptical conclusion. I think the best example of that kind of debunker was Philip J. Klass, who, no matter what you ever gave him, he always had a ready-made explanation for everything, even if he had to make up certain details in order to reach that. So again, those kind of skeptics, I'm glad that we've kind of moved beyond that. We've got some good ones, even though I disagree with Mick and with Brian on a lot of their conclusions. But back to Brian for a moment. In his article, and he has an excellent website, Skeptoid. But in his article, he had said it may be mass hysteria that these children experienced. Mick West had similarly proposed that is it unrational to presume that maybe a puppet show had been traveling through the area and that the kids could have seen something like that.
Oh my gosh.
In Ruwa, Zimbabwe.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing about that. You know, I mean, again, in that instance, I have to say, if that's a seemingly more likely scenario, great. But where is any evidence at all in support of that claim, right?
Right. You could walk down the street and find and obviously if it's a puppet show in the area with no faculty members, they're not going to come and go that quickly.
Yeah.
Number two, they're probably going to be trying to sell to your kids something. You know what I mean? When I always remember like the Simpsons episodes where the yo-yo guys come, you know, and they're doing their yo-yo tricks.
Yeah. Oh my
and
gosh.
then they sell all the yo-yos to all the kids. You know what I mean?
Oh,
so there's a reason they're not just doing it for fun.
Right.
So anyway.
Well, you know, so on the skeptical questions of could it be mass hysteria, to me, that would be more likely than, you know, just completely unfounded claims that involve things like puppet shows, right? That magically appear and then disappear from the area with no trace. If there were physical evidence of some kind, that might change this case quite a bit, right? Enter Gunter Hofer and some of those who actually were investigators on the ground with the Ruwa incident. When I met Gunter in Washington, D.C., one of the things that he pointed out, because I was moderating this panel discussion, and he said people had, you know, argued, I mean, you guys didn't find any evidence of radiation, did you? And let me just give you an idea of just how technically gifted Gunter is. Gunter actually, he hadn't been able to have access to a Geiger counter at the time. So he built a simple but functional, and they were able to test it against background radiation. He built a Geiger counter that they were able to use in the investigations, which archival footage shows. Now, what Gunter conveyed to me was that there had been these additional sightings over this field area. And he said, I decided to actually walk out toward the field and see if there was anything in that field. And he said that indeed there were a pair of circular impressions that he found in that area that completely jibed with the area where people had said that the objects had also been observed. In addition to that, this is actually conveyed in Randall's film. There have been sightings of what many characterize as possibly the reentry of some kind of, spacecraft, maybe a satellite, possibly a meteor, but something had been seen streaking through the sky. And it was later revealed that in addition to what the children primarily observed there on September 16th, 1994, locals in the area had been describing a whole lot of strange things. They had claimed that they had encountered beings that looked very unusual on the roadways there at night in the area. And one account had described that they said that the locals believed they were meeting their dead, ghostly apparitional kind of forms and things.
Did you say they were eating their dead?
They were seeing.
Meeting their dead.
I'm glad that was qualified because it was going on my list of things I was concerned about again.
But the point is that, I mean, there had actually been, over the course of several days, sightings of aerial phenomena, not Ariel School, but literal, like skyborne aerial phenomena. There had been observations at night of humanoid-like beings that people had claimed that they'd seen, in addition to what the children all primarily described the date of September 16th. And then, of course, we also had the depressions in the field that Gunter Hofer described. There's a whole lot more to this case, and Randall Nickerson and I have talked about trying to get together and really sort through some of that data. But he literally told me that there's so much that he couldn't have fit it within the 1 hour and a half long documentary that he made about this case. So to summarize, I feel that there probably was a lot more data than just what children said that they saw. And to me, mass hysteria doesn't leave circular impressions in fields. It doesn't cause streaking lights that are observed through the sky and reportedly that were detected on radar around the time. So there could be some corroborative data about this case that truly, to me, does warrant deeper investigation. But bottom line, I've had to come back, and after being struck in the head several times with several bricks, I've had to look at this case and recognize a mass witness sighting of several, among several children, broad daylight, accompanied by auditory phenomena, the whistling noise, the observation of the craft, the observation of the occupants. This is a hell of an important case.
Yeah, why can't we just say there was a UFO there? Seriously.
Well, again,
I'm saying
skeptical.
it. There, I said it.
I don't have to conclude that these are extraterrestrials. Again, we don't know what they were. There have been a lot of conjectures about what this could represent. Time travelers, interdimensional visitors. Could they be some crypto-terrestrial occupants that are here somewhere amidst us here on Earth, but they're not from elsewhere? These, according to some, seem very unlikely, and that ET is the best explanation. But then again, those who have argued against ET have said
Occam's razor.
Yeah, I mean, no matter how you cut it, there are going to be arguments that can be made against any kind of explanation. Secret government projects,
Sure, yeah.
Call it what you want. But I mean, something happened. It was a UFO, like you said, Brad.
Correct. So then that gets us to the next one we want to talk about, which this is the one I'm just like fascinated with, because this was literally an entire town. I think the town was 100,000 people or something, 130,000 people or something like that. And they saw this thing. So we're talking about Virginia. Is it Varginha?
Mm-hmm.
Varginha, Brazil, in 1996. So basically a spaceship crashed, correct? Some cops kind of went after, they got called. They were on the radio. They said there were some beings around. I think there was 3 of them possibly. A couple of them were running around. One of them, so they get this call on the radio. Hey, look out for these things. What do you know? They're driving down the road. Boom, one runs across the street in front of these 2 cops. Cop pulls the car over, jumps out, grabs this thing, and puts it in his cop car, right? Ends up taking it somewhere. The guy ends up dying within days from some infection that they have no idea about. I think in one part, I think that the hospital that this thing was taken to, they ended up having to tear down the wing of the hospital because of the sulfur smell that was so bad in it. And the people that smelled this thing said for weeks, they literally couldn't smell because of this odor that was in their nostrils. And that doesn't even compare to the one, let me think. There was one that 3 children saw, and we're talking, it was down an alley. I think they went through a gate, and there was kind of this alleyway. It was a fairly big, grass alley between a couple of houses, and they go down and they're, within 20 feet of this thing, crouched on the side of the road or on the side of this wall. They're getting this telepathic kind of message saying, hey, I'm scared. You're scared. We're all scared. I just want to get out. There's a case about a doctor, or the part of the case is, this thing was taken in a body bag and x-rayed. And the doctor said, hey, when we do x-rays, we always view the x-rays after the fact. They said they did not allow us to view the x-rays. We x-rayed it through the bag. We didn't get to see it. They took the x-rays and all this stuff happened. The next thing you know, U.S. military shows up. The federal government shows up from the United States. Unannounced and without the permission of the Brazilian government. They take everything over and it disappears.
That's a pretty good summary of the case, I have to say. So kudos on that. I'll add to that.
Let's go ahead. Yeah. So tell me where I'm wrong, and let's get to the details.
Yeah,
there are some details.
There are some details. And again, now I'll tell you something funny. I actually have yet to see James Fox's film about this. I know James, I've known him for many years.
The Moment of Contact, is that it?
That's the film. Yeah. And people keep telling me you got to watch this. Now,
I have watched it.
while he was making that film, and he was there in Brazil. It just so happened I had been in Brazil at the same time, and I had been conducting some research, but I was in a completely different area. I had been down in the central portion of Brazil, about 3 hours west of the federal capital of Brasilia. And I was in an area, it's actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site called Chapada dos Veadeiros. And they have a town there called Alto Paraíso, which is just decked out with UFO stuff. I mean, you walk down the street, and in English, keep in mind it's Brazilian Portuguese there, and eu aprendendo português, but meu português está muito, muito ruim, which means it's really bad, but I'm learning, okay? So, but I was there on the ground trying to learn the language, getting to know the locals, I think that time I spent a month, and then I came back again last spring and spent close to 3 months. But in Alto Paraíso, there are like restaurants called Area 51. Everywhere you look, there are alienígenas, aliens. They've got flying saucers. They've got like a whole museum and actually a whole hotel that has like a flying saucer out in front of it. So long story short, there are parts of Brazil that have a real big alien culture outside of places like Varginha, which now also has a monument to this incident we're talking about. And if time allows, we may get
I think they even have a monument to the creatures or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like kind of a tourist trap.
Well, not unlike if you visit places like Roswell, New Mexico today here in the United States. Now, it's important to point out that you have a lot of that in places like Brazil. For those, again, I've seen skeptics say things like, well, this is a culture-bound phenomena. There's a reason why Americans are just fascinated with UFOs, but nobody else around the world sees them. I can assure you, you go to Brazil, and you'll find out very quickly that they are just as fascinated with this, and they claim to have their own unique relationship to the phenomenon. But so entirely apart from James, who was there at the same time making this documentary, I was seeing the speculation on Twitter. Micah Hanks is in Brazil. So is James Fox. Something big's going on. Actually, it was completely unrelated. And unfortunately, I haven't seen his film yet, but I do intend to watch it. Now, with those caveats in place, my own investigations into this case, I'd like to add some additional details here.
Yeah, because everybody loves facts. And like I said, I skipped over it pretty quickly. So...
yeah. Well, prior to the main events that occurred, which I guess we could say that those main events occur around January 20th, 1996.
Okay.
I'm going to go with the date of about January 13th, and there's a reason why I'll provide for that in a moment. But at about 1 o'clock in the morning, there were a pair of farmers, Oralina and Euricio de Freitas, who were there in the greater area outside of Varginha. Oralina had described hearing early that morning like some sort of a ruckus outside. It seemed to be that there had been some animal disturbance, and she wanted to know what was, disturbing her cattle. And so she runs to the window to look outside, hoping that there's not, some animal out there or something going on. And she sees a object flying over their property. She said it was gray. It appeared to be producing smoke, and it was moving silently. So this object had not been making the noise, but the cattle were being disturbed by it. This sort of animal disturbance is something that you see pretty frequently in cases like this. So Oralina goes and she wakes up Euricio, her husband, and brings him to the window. And according to their account, they observed this object for close to 40 minutes. It sort of hovered, but it gradually continued to descend over the course of that time. They judged that it was about the size of a bus. Again, it continued to produce smoke throughout the time that they were able to watch it. And eventually it heads off in the direction of the Fernão Dias Highway. And then they were no longer able to see it from that point. Now, they didn't report this officially to anybody until after the primary incidents involving the sighting by the girls that you mentioned, Brad, and all of this comes to public light. They, however, were very terrified by what they saw, and they didn't sleep well that night. Now, it just so happens that there had been a pilot who, before he was flying later that morning, on the same date, January 13th, and he distinctly remembered this because he had been on his way to a ultralight aircraft demonstration with some friends on the date of January 13th, 1996. As he's traveling along the same stretch of highway, De Souza says that he sees this object not only come overhead, but he sees it go down like it crashed. So he veers off the highway and travels on back roads in the direction of where he thinks, initially having seen this, he was under the impression this had been like a dirigible, like a blimp had gone down. And he gets to the location and he suddenly sees that, already where the craft had gone down, there was a military presence. There were military police and army officials that were around. And he's basically told, get the hell out of here. We don't want you around here. Now, he, of course, said that it was pretty clear what he had seen, and he remembered that date. Those two sightings are probably the earliest two cases that accompany this. But of course, on January 20th, 1996 is when we had the sightings by the locals. Now, one important point that should be made about this date, because this is when all the main events happen. All the locals in Varginha described there being a tremendous storm that occurred on this date. They said a huge storm rolled through that day. Before long, it was probably early afternoon, I guess, the Varginha Fire Department began to get these telephone calls saying that there was a weird animal that some of the locals had been seeing. There were these two little areas kind of in a suburb area of Varginha called Jardim and Santana. Go ahead.
So if, let's say, this thing crashed on the 13th and these things didn't happen till the 20th, I know there was kind of speculation that maybe they hid or they were on a river or something of that sort, a water source. So is that kind of what you think, that it crashed on the 13th, these things got out, they're hanging around the local environment for a week? So
that's kind of the idea. See, this area that I was talking about between Santana and Jardim is like kind of like the stretch of the strip of forest between these two neighborhoods.
Okay.
And that's where locals have been saying, they were seeing some sort of weird animal in that forest area for several days.
Sure.
So on the date of the 20th, after this huge storm, the fire department there in town, they're getting all these phone calls saying there's some sort of animal over here in the woods. Firefighters were seen in the area. And interestingly, there was also a vehicle that they said that had belonged to the Escola de Sargento das Armas, which was basically the local military academy in that area. They said that they saw one of those vehicles there as well. And indeed, there were men seen coming out of the forest reportedly carrying large bags. Now, that afternoon is the same afternoon at around 3 p.m. that we had these three local girls, and they weren't all young girls. A couple of them were teenagers, but the oldest, Katia Andrade Javier, was like 22 years old. And then I think that Lilian and Valakira were like 16 and 14, I think.
Yeah, like the younger sisters or something. I think they were.
They were sisters. I'm not sure what the situation with Katia was, if she was related to them, but they were all together, and they observed this creature, right, that you described. And in fact, actually, with the episode artwork for this evening's episode, as Brad showed me, there's a really good representation of what this creature reportedly looked like. A quick description: very thin, small. It was hunched over. It appeared they said that they could see like protrusions and veins and things in its arm. There were at least 3 ridges along the top of its head. The eyes appeared to be fairly large, bulbous, red. Some accounts said also that they were glowing. Katia and the other girls had said there's no way that this was another well-known animal. Again, I've seen skeptical interpretations trying to say that this was basically a large variety of ground rodent that's prominent in parts of Brazil. What are they called?
Capybara.
Capybara, thank you. I've seen those, by the way.
That doesn't look anything like it.
Being quadrupeds, no. Again, this is something that I think in our unique area of research, being interested in mystery bipeds, if you see these capybaras, again, a quadruped that in no way even close.
It looks like maybe a giant guinea pig, but not this thing. No,
doesn't look like a humanoid, even a hunched over humanoid. No. Now, another interpretation had been that there was a kid in town that, again, had suffered some variety of mental disturbance. His name was Mujinho, I think. And sightings that the girls reported, they said it might have been Mujinho and that he had been covered in mud because he was really muddy and nasty after that rainstorm. Again, the girls said, no, Mujinho doesn't have red eyes. He doesn't have these ridges along his head. They said what we saw was clearly not human. Now, the really weird part about all this, too, is that there had been a couple of presumably plain clothes, but military officers that were seen that day. They were trying to get a window closed on a car door. One of those 2 officers had gone home to speak to his family that afternoon. And he'd said, it's going to be a late night. I won't be able to be back home until later. And that officer's name was Marco Eli Cherez. He was later also seen driving along. And according to one account, it's believed that Marco may have encountered either this creature or a similar one to it, and had attempted to capture this creature without donning any kind of protective gear, and that this animal would have been taken to a nearby hospital. There are actually a couple of them that they would have actually had this. The regional hospital in Varginha, and then another one that's called the Humanitas, I think, the Humanitas Hospital. The story had been that it had been taken to regional hospital first and then perhaps carried to the other one later. In any case, and this is true and confirmed, the story of the young officer And what happened to him is probably the most perplexing aspect of all this, because even if we can't confirm the existence of extraterrestrials or a creature that he allegedly encountered, the young man did die.
And it was fairly quickly after this.
It was incredibly quickly. Sepsis set in. The official cause of death, as I understand it, had been pneumonia. Doctors who had been treating him said that antibiotics had been administered, but he just died very quickly. They said that they had seen things like this before, but maybe only once or twice in their entire careers, and that it was extremely unusual that this 23-year-old, perfectly healthy young man would suddenly just start having all of these issues. He was even, I think, tested for HIV and AIDS because they wanted to know if there was any kind of autoimmune deficiency or any kind of disease he might have been suffering from, and they found no evidence of anything. So his death remains quite mysterious, but again, it has been proposed that his alleged encounter with this being had something to do with that.
I know that in the film Moment of Contact, they talk to, or they attempt to talk to this man's partner.
Mm-hmm.
And they go to this man's house and they knock on the door. He's very hostile with them, basically opens up an upstairs window, screams at them and tells them to leave or he's going to shoot them. And when he says, I'm going to shoot you, he was serious. And they were, it kind of, the cameramen and the people that were there were very, they believed him and they left promptly. So here's a man that this happened to him and he literally will not talk about this to anyone at all, period.
Yeah.
So
it really bothers him. And again, there had been a cardiologist, Cesario Lincoln Furtado, who had treated him. I think I guess he's probably still alive, but he'd have to be maybe in his 60s or 70s. But again, he said that the treatments, the antibiotics that they had given to him, Sherez didn't respond to it. It said it was like giving him water and sugar, placebos, basically. No response. Now, there were also, now you mentioned Men in Black earlier.
Right.
And there is this odd aspect of this case because the three girls who had their initial sighting, they also claimed that they had received, like at 10 o'clock in the evening, some 4 months after the incident, they said that they were visited by a group of 5 men who were presumably military officials. I don't know that they said that they were Americans. I don't recall that was implied. But
I think in the documentary that they basically, somebody had mentioned that basically when, the Americans showed up, like everybody shut up and, it was done.
There certainly were discussions about Americans, which again, that's a strange aspect to all this because that's well outside their jurisdiction. But
here's my theory.
Sure. Yeah.
My theory is that what if the global cabal of government agencies kind of have an elected group of people, and let's say we're
here
Americans.
We go.
And I was going to say, Russ, what do you think about that?
Gosh,
and it's kind of in a treaty that says, okay, if we're in part of these nations, not Russia, not China, not our sworn enemies or whatever that was at the time, not on the backside of the Iron Curtain, that we make a phone call and the Americans show up and we take those people to Area 51 or S7 or whatever that is, because we have history with that and we're going to share technology with you. And, maybe that was my thought. So, there was technically out of their jurisdiction, but maybe that it's kind of an agreed upon. It's just agreed upon through this kind of back channel that we're going to show up and we're going to share some things with you, but we just don't want this infection getting out and killing everybody. So anyway, go ahead.
I'll say in the words of my friend Nick Pope, interesting if true.
Right.
And you never know. But there are enough stories where you hear things like that. And I'll just interject that there may be some precedent for that. I recently, Brad, this because you caught this episode, but I spoke with Colum Kelleher, who was the former deputy administrator of the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. Now, that was an official Defense Intelligence Agency program that ran between 2008 and 2010. There are a lot of critics, of course, who raise issues about the scope of the subject and the studies that they conducted. Let's put all that aside.
Here's what people don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe the DIA's budget is like triple the CIA.
It's pretty good. I think
I read that somewhere that, the CIA gets all kind of the cloak and dagger stuff, but the military intelligence and the defense, DIA, their budgets are twice as big as the CIA.
Just keep in mind, again, the DIA is a defense combat support agency, right? It's a combat support agency to the DoD. In terms of preserving our way of life, I mean, the defense budget every year, right, is the largest budget. I mean, it's huge. It's tremendous. You can go look at the numbers, and it only gets larger every year. I think it used to. Well, anyway, I'm not even going to try and cite the figures.
We're not even going to talk about all the crack that they sell and get all that black money.
But the point is, like you're saying, an intelligence agency that is directly a combat support agency to the DoD. I mean, of course, there's going to be significant funding for that, and at times they will fund some rather what we would, I guess, call seemingly outlandish ideas, so as not to be met with surprise. In other words, we look at the history of things like remote viewing and all these kinds of things, UFOs. Why would the CIA or why would the DIA or other intelligence agencies study these kinds of things that seem so far out? Well, what if there's something to it? What if during the Cold War, the Soviets had been studying these things and we hadn't been, right? What if there's some sort of a technological breakthrough that's made and the enemy, China today or Russia, may have that or obtain it before we do? Again, those kind of loopholes are not the kind of thing that defense agencies want to allow to happen. And the only way that you can allow that to happen is leaving those things undiscovered or unstudied on your own. So yeah, we do study some rather far out ideas.
Well, have you ever read the book The Day After Roswell?
Oh yeah. Philip J. Corso.
Correct. Yeah. So I don't know if that man's still around, but that's
he passed away.
Okay. That is, to me, I don't think Russ has ever read
no, I have not.
A lot of people haven't because, it's kind of one of those books you get. And why would you ever read this? But, there's that chapter in there. They talk about technology and they say, okay, well, there was these, on the windows of Roswell, there was these things where you look through them and you could see at night. Well, up until that occurred, there was basically we were going nowhere with night vision. Then all of a sudden night vision, basically overnight, it's in Vietnam. We got starlight scopes.
Yeah. And not just night vision, fiber optic technology, Kevlar technologies, microcomputer components, all kinds of things.
We were doing carbon-based transistors and carbon-based chips.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, here's this microchip that they pulled out of this ship that's busted, and it's silicone-based. So they give that to IBM. Next thing you know, IBM's got a jump on everything. And, there's all this technology that you can look back and you can say, here's when it occurred. Here's when the book says that they went and met with these people, and you see a timeline when that technology got commercialized.
Yeah.
So, what if they have that agreement around the world? Hey, we're going to commercialize your stuff, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, go from there. So we're getting off the case, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, the fundamental point I wanted to make about mentioning ALSAP and the DIA was that during that program, DIA officials working under the auspices of Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Studies, they traveled to Brazil and they interviewed UFO witnesses. And again, a good friend of mine who sadly passed away just this year, AJ Givard, who was probably the best known Brazilian ufologist. AJ told me we were sitting there having a beer down in Curitiba, along with the very lovely Rafaela Krasinski. We were sitting there and he told me, he said, Bigelow's people came down here and interviewed me. And that was the first time I heard that. But of course, there are blog posts all about this. And so when I spoke with Colm Kelleher the other day, I said, what was ALSAP's interest in Brazil? And he said all these cases, all this stuff that was going on down there, Colares and some of these that involved human injury and things like this, Varginha, they'd been very interested and they did go down there and investigate. So the point is, the idea of Americans going down there and officially or unofficially investigating these kinds of things is not without precedent. In fact, it happened between 2008 and 2010 under the ALSAP contract. Now, back to Varginha. These girls said that 5 men came and visited them one evening and basically told them, look, we want you to deny what you saw, that creature, on camera. And I don't know that they named an amount, but they told them, we'll give you enough money that you could leave Brazil if you want to. I don't know that they necessarily were implying you should leave Brazil, but they said that they'd have enough money to be able to do it. The girls said that they didn't even think about accepting that bribe, which is what it was. But they did say that they eventually decided, because of those kinds of pressures that they were feeling, to come forward and talk about what they'd seen as a matter of protection. So those are the main facts of the case, there is one more thing I should mention too, that the local zoo, there were a series of mysterious animal deaths that occurred there at the local Varginha Zoo as well. I think that there'd been an ocelot. What else had died?
That's
There'd
a
been
cat, right?
Yeah, it's a large cat.
Okay.
There was a variety of deer, and then there was another kind of animal too. But I think that they'd said between, maybe 5 and 7 animals or so had died, and they didn't understand any reason that these animals would have just dropped dead. Now, the zoo officials didn't explicitly correlate that with the UFO sighting, but those deaths had occurred right around the same time. And it's hard to know really whether all of these aspects of the case, or the things that people have kind of linked to it, are related or not. The main elements, I think, are probably the sightings of the object beginning as early as January 13th by multiple individuals, and then all the sightings that occurred on January 20th.
Well,
The local hospitals, the military academies, and the Brazilian army, of course, denied that anything had ever been taken to any of those facilities those days in question.
And if you want, or if you watch the documentary, there was something that kind of got thrown into the case that was very, to me, was very compelling. And it was a doctor, and his family basically, if you look at a map of where this occurred, it's not very big. It kind of over here, they saw the thing here in this alley, blah, blah, blah. And there was a doctor, his wife and his 2 kids, and literally they were looking out the window or in the yard or something, and they were literally watching a UFO do a search pattern very low over this area. And they never said anything before. And literally during the documentary, somebody said, "Hey, you need to go talk to this guy." And they go and talk to him, and he says, "I'm not doing it on," they said they showed up to interview this guy, and this guy's like, "I'm not doing this on film." I can't remember if he did it on film or not during the show, or maybe they kind of blacked him out and, did him from behind or whatever. But, he basically explained that, hey, when this was occurring, there was literally something, not a helicopter, but an unidentified, UFO flying over this area looking. They thought it was kind of flying in a search pattern back and forth looking for these things. So not only did this one crash, the homing beacon went off, it made a call out to outer space, and their buddy showed up looking for him. So, who knows I don't know how many ended up being caught and were dead. I know one was dead, one was caught. So there's 2. I thought they said maybe 3, who knows, maybe 4 or 5 of them were there, 6 of them, and 3 of them went down the river and got picked up by their buddies. And, there was like, "Hey, we were over here, start looking for them." So anyway, that was a fairly interesting part of the documentary too. So.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Now, it's worth pointing out that, aspects of this case are very similar to other reports like Roswell and other alleged crash incidents. I'm pretty skeptical of most of those crash, sightings and incidents involving UFO crashes, but that isn't to say that it's not possible that these, incidents have occurred, and that there actually have been a few that are legitimate, and that there have been actual cover-ups that have occurred. It's debatable whether that will come out as a result of the current efforts of the Department of Defense and the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Again, guys, I literally spent all day today prior to this interview with the debrief team covering. We were, of course, observing this day-long event that NASA put together today with the findings of its independent UAP study. And NASA says that this study group and its members hope to have a report on its findings regarding unidentified aerial phenomena that they'll probably publish by the end of about July, which is earlier than the last time frame that I'd heard. I'd heard it would be about September before the findings would be released. Now they're saying July, so they're moving pretty quickly. Participating in this public briefing today, and I was also on a call only with reporters right there at the very end of the day, and it's been a very long day. I was up before 6 a.m. working and been charging right on through all day, but I was on that call with reporters and hearing some of the additional dialogue, and to my surprise, it was supposed to just be NASA study team members on that call with the media. I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of Aero, answers a question. He stayed on, didn't have to do that, wasn't even announced that he would, but he was there. He was also one of the presenters today and presented some new details about the findings of the DoD. He also has said, though, and this came out during the Senate hearings earlier this year, that Aero, his office, currently does not have what's called Title 50 authority. And what that effectively means is that, Aero despite being the department within the Department of Defense that is tasked with evaluating and collecting information on UAP, they don't have access to the very best data that currently is in the possession of the U.S. intelligence community. Consequently, he also says that he has not yet seen any kind of data that seems to indicate any kind of evidence of extraterrestrials. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that that's what UAP are or that somebody in government has it, but if that data is in the possession of anybody in government, intelligence community officials or otherwise, members of special access programs, highly compartmentalized programs within government, Dr. Kirkpatrick wouldn't necessarily have access to that. And he was complaining about this to Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York during that Senate hearing. So the point I'm trying to make here is that people say, well, Arrow's saying they haven't found any kind of evidence of anything weird. Yeah, but he's also stated publicly that currently they're not being provided the full amount of funding that was outlined in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2023. And they don't have Title 50 authority, which should grant them access to the best information that the CIA, the NSA, and other agencies possess on this topic. So could we really conclusively say that that data doesn't exist and that there might not still be some information in government holdings that, like the Varginha case seems to indicate, might point to something extraordinary? We can't conclusively say it doesn't exist. It very well may.
Could our government be lying to us?
That's a good question,
Shocker.
too.
That is shocker. That is, yeah. I don't ever see that happening because they're so honest and they love their citizens so much.
Yeah.
Hey, Micah, let me ask you a question as we're winding down here. Brad alluded to it earlier, but there's people in the Bigfoot community that believe, I think that Tom Powell was probably one of the first ones that postured it, that, he essentially said in one chapter in the Locals and then later in his book, The Edges, that he thought or hypothesized that Bigfoot was essentially a worker bee for, alien type things. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? I guess would be a fair way to put it.
I do have thoughts about it, Russ. I don't want to discourage anybody out there who's interested in that possibility or who may be sympathetic toward that. But I mean, to me, Sasquatch sounds so much like a hominoid. It bears such similarity to, our early hominin ancestors, right? It really seems to me like the best explanation for Sasquatch is that this is some kind of, again, as Dr. Meldrum and others would term it, a relict hominoid.
Yes.
Now, there are those researchers like Stan Gordon, who incidentally, I'm going back to Ohio this weekend and I'm going to be at an event with Stan Gordon. But Stan has long noted there are parallels between where, UFO sightings occur and where people say they see Sasquatch. But I would also say that scientifically correlation does not necessarily mean causation and vice versa. In other words, just because two phenomena seem to overlap in terms of where they're seen, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're connected or correlated, right? So
right.
For my own part, I'm careful to keep the Sasquatch children away from the UFO children. I don't link them explicitly,
Okay.
but there's some interesting conjectures about that.
Yeah.
So as we close up for the day, this has been very interesting. Where are you going to be at in Ohio this weekend?
I'm going to be at the famous Monster Fest that Seth Breedlove and the fine folks at Small Town Monsters put on, which is kind of a late stage development. My understanding, of course, had been that the legendary Loren Coleman was going to be at the event, and unfortunately he's had a complication and can't attend. So I ended up being approached about coming up there for the event. And I'm really happy to be able to make it up there because, everybody from Seth Breedlove, who I mentioned, Shannon LeGros, lots of friends of the program here, of course, Cliff Barrickman, lots of excellent researchers are going to be at that event.
Is that the one I think it's in Canton or something?
Yeah,
Okay.
That's it. Yeah, it's in Canton. And given that there's so many people talking about Sasquatch, and then you got some like, again, Stan Gordon, who kind of do the overlap, I'm going to be looking at, and this is the lecture, not just like what we talked about last time, right? Sasquatch and government, but I'm going to be talking about some of this UAP stuff too. So basically the two shows I've done with you guys, if you were to mash that all together into a presentation, that's what I'm going to be talking about this weekend.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would
How
be
can people
very
get a
interesting.
hold? How can people get a hold of you, Micah? I know, of course, your great podcast. Will you tell them the name of that and how else to get a hold of you?
Yeah, basically everything's online at micahhanks.com. The flagship, of course, is the Micah Hanks program, but as Russ knows, there's also Sasquatch Tracks,
Yes.
which is the podcast that I do that's devoted solely to Sasquatch. The Micah Hanks program is really going to talk a lot more about UAP, science mysteries, space mysteries, archaeology, things like that. And I stay pretty busy, but you can find me there at micahhanks.com. And of course, my team and I have our news site also called The Debrief, which is thedebrief.org. And we've been providing coverage on all these issues about UAP. And occasionally I'll throw in a little relic hominoid interest in there too. So,
we appreciate your friendship, being such good friends to Brad and I. It was great to see you in Ohio and spend time with you in the woods. And I look forward to the next time.
Man, I think the world of both you guys. And sincerely, Russ and Brad, both of you, it was a delight getting out in the field. And I hope we'll do that again sooner rather than later. Seriously.
Let's do it.
Absolutely, sir. All right. Thank you.
Until next time.
Yeah, boys, you have a great evening, okay?
Hey,
Talk
you
to you
too.
soon.
I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
All right, thanks. Well,
So,
Russ, you didn't get to talk that much. I'm just going to step over you right now and just why let you talk anymore?
I mean, is there anything more frustrating than a skeptic telling a witness what they didn't see, whether you're talking about a UAP or a Bigfoot witness or whatever it happens
Or whatever
to be?
it
But
is.
man,
Yeah. Like I said, professional skeptics, that's what they are. When you become a professional at something, then you lose credibility in my book. So
yeah,
it is what it is.
I wanted to tell everyone that he was talking about the Small Town Monster, which is a really well-known documentary crew that's usually getting like 1 million hits on their shows. But they flew down or drove down or whatever they did here several months ago and did an interview with me for several hours and then followed me in the woods one day. And they have the release of on YouTube this weekend. It's I don't recall the name of it, but it's a Bigfoot type thing relating to West Virginia, and the release is this Sunday. So if people looking for some Bigfoot stuff, I'll be out there doing that.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's our hour. That was a pretty quick hour. We packed a lot of stuff into it. And like I said, I'm a Bigfoot guy and I've never really been a UFO guy, but there's just a couple cases out there that are just fascinating to me. So
like, subscribe,
Yep.
thebigfootdoc.com. Love to hear from you. Brad and I have some witnesses coming up here in the next couple weeks that no one else has got to hear, which should be cool.
Yep, absolutely. Wide Open Research on Instagram, wideopenresearch@gmail.com. Go to the Untold Radio Network on Spotify, Apple, all that kind of stuff. You can find us there along with everybody else. And I think that is it. Are we out of here?
Thanks, everyone.